For 8 months, a widowed entrepreneur waged a war against something all the money in the world couldn't fix: the nightly screams of his own children. Every single dawn, the twin boys would wake in a sheer panic, swearing they saw a grey woman who wanted to take them away. Psychologists gave up, nannies left in tears. Then, just when all hope seemed to be gone, an unlikely caregiver walked into their lives. And with simple stories, observant eyes, and an immense heart, she rebuilt what grief had nearly destroyed: the feeling of home. The house was enormous, silent, and immaculate from the outside. But on the inside, at 3:15 in the morning, everything fell apart. Ethan Caldwell ran barefoot down the dark hallway as soon as he heard the first scream. He reached the twins' room, already knowing what he would find: the empty beds, the locked window, and his two little boys huddled under the desk, trembling. "She was here. Again," Liam whispered. "She just watches. She wants to take us too," Noah added, his eyes wide with terror. Ethan tried to reach for them, but his sons flinched away. In that moment, they couldn't even trust their own father. "There's no one here, my loves. You're safe," he said, his voice cracking. But he didn't believe it himself. And then, like every other night, the exhausting ritual began. Warm milk, lights on, made-up stories, and in the end, the cold floor, where Ethan would lie down beside them, praying for just a few hours of sleep. Ethan Caldwell had never been a man of weakness. He founded one of the country's largest healthcare networks from scratch, facing economic crises, lawsuits, and billion-dollar decisions with cold, hard precision. But none of those skills were worth anything at 3 in the morning, faced with 2 children cowering under a table, terrified of a ghost he couldn't see. A widower for 9 months, Ethan still caught himself waiting to hear Claire's laughter echo through the house. She was a child psychologist and seemed born to be a mother. When the boys had nightmares, she would welcome them with a hug and a few magic words. Now, with her absence growing in every corner, Ethan discovered something he had never faced before: utter powerlessness. Liam and Noah, 5-year-old identical twins, were inseparable. They had always been active, smiling kids, full of questions, until the day they found their mother lifeless in her bed on a bright Sunday morning. Claire had suffered a cardiac arrest in her sleep. Since then, the nights had become a battlefield. Ethan tried everything: therapy, neurologists, diet changes, switching bedrooms. He bought new toys, installed cameras, even brought in priests and alternative healers. But nothing stopped his sons from waking up screaming night after night, always at the same time, always talking about the grey woman. 5 nannies had already quit, the last one left crying after hearing one of the boys whisper in the dark, "She's going to take you too." What hurt Ethan the most wasn't his son's fear, or even his own exhaustion. It was their empty gaze during the day. The two had stopped playing. They rarely laughed. They refused their favorite foods. It was as if they'd left their childhood right there, next to their mother's body, and never went back to get it. And it was at that point, when their small, pained gestures hurt more than any diagnosis, that Ethan understood. This was no longer a phase. It was an abyss. And he was falling right along with them. Ethan never wanted to be a perfect father. He just wanted to be enough. After Claire was gone, he tried to fill both roles, but the truth was too harsh. He didn't know how. He mixed up their medication schedules, got lost in their school uniforms, cut their fruit the wrong way. But what crushed him most was not knowing how to reach his sons' hearts. Ethan's wish was simple, and yet impossible. He wanted the boys to feel safe again, for them to sleep through one whole night, to play in the backyard without looking over their shoulders, for them, just for a few seconds, to forget that their mother died in her sleep. More than that, he wanted to feel like he was still capable of protecting them, that he hadn't failed as a father at the most crucial moment. Every morning, as he poured coffee into the mug Claire used to use, he made the same silent promise: "Today, I'll get it right." But at the end of each draining, defeated day, he'd turn off the kitchen light, feeling less like a man, less like a father. His pain was silent, disguised in reports, meetings, and numbers. But inside, what he truly yearned for was to hear the sound of his boys' laughter filling the house again, to smell a cake baking in the oven, to see them getting dirty playing in the yard. Just that. What was once normal now felt completely out of reach. Once, Liam let a question slip that Ethan never forgot. "Daddy, if Mummy died while she was sleeping, can we die too if we close our eyes?" Ethan froze. The coffee grew cold on the table. He tried to explain, tried to rationalize. But how do you teach a child that the world keeps going even after the impossible happens? That sleep is safe when the person they loved most departed in the middle of the night. And it was in that moment that Ethan's wish shifted. It was no longer just about seeing his sons sleep. It was about giving them a new way to see the world, a way to feel safe again. He wanted to heal without knowing how. He wanted to rebuild without knowing what to use. He wanted a new chance, not for himself, but for Liam and Noah, so they could grow up knowing that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It transforms, and it can come back in a different way. But where could he find someone to help two little boys believe in that? With every new attempt to solve his children's problem, Ethan felt more lost. That week, he hired a therapist specializing in childhood trauma. She arrived with colorful books, symbolic games, and a folder brimming with certifications. She spent an hour with the boys and left saying they showed symptoms of severe post-traumatic stress and that the best course of action would be to start a light medication. Ethan thanked her, paid for the consultation, and completely ignored the suggestion. 2 days later, it was a nanny recommended by an international agency. She had worked for diplomatic families, spoke 4 languages, and carried an air of unshakable confidence. She lasted exactly 72 hours. She left in the middle of the night after hearing Noah crying in his sleep, saying that the lady with the grey eyes was on the ceiling. "Those children need treatment, not a nanny," was all she said before leaving, her face pale. Ethan had lost count of how many times he'd heard variations of the same phrase, that it was nobody's fault, that it was a normal part of the grieving process, that it would all pass with time. But here, time only seemed to deepen the pain. At work, his team started noticing the change. The man who once led with conviction now seemed distracted, irritable, and emotionally absent. Ethan began delegating important decisions, cancelling trips, and leaving early. But when he got home, he found an increasingly grim scene. The boys avoided their own bedroom. They slept on the sofa, holding each other, even with all the lights on. They invented strange rituals. They couldn't sleep without saying 5 specific prayers, nor drink water from normal glasses, only from the 2 that had belonged to their mother. Watching it hurt, Ethan observed them in silence, trying to pretend everything was under control, but inside, he wondered where he had failed. How could this man, accustomed to dealing with numbers, spreadsheets, diagnoses, and difficult decisions, be unable to handle the fear of 2 5-year-old boys? And worse, he began to believe that maybe no one could. When he got the call from the school, asking him to pick up his sons urgently, Ethan knew the problem had spilled over the walls of his home. They fell asleep during math class, and when they were woken up, they panicked. One of them started screaming that it was too dark and that he didn't want to be taken. Ethan got to the school in 20 minutes, his heart racing. He found his sons trembling, their eyes downcast, and the principal with a grave expression. "The children are emotionally exhausted, Mr. Caldwell, and we can no longer pretend this is just a phase," he agreed with a nod. For the first time, he felt he might be facing something that not even all his love as a father could cure alone. The next morning, Ethan barely had time for coffee. An important meeting with foreign investors awaited him in the city's financial district. He put on his expensive suit, mentally rehearsed the numbers, and tried to switch on the autopilot mode that always worked. But it didn't last long. Before the presentation even began, his phone vibrated 5 times in a row. On the 5th, he answered, his heart already tightening. It was the school. "Mr. Caldwell, the boys need to be picked up immediately. One of them had a crisis during recess, screaming that the grey woman was in the hallways. The other students were frightened." Ethan didn't even apologize. He bolted from the room like a fugitive, leaving behind months of negotiations and a multi-million-dollar contract on the verge of being signed. When he arrived at the school, he found a small group of parents gathered at the entrance, whispering. He recognized one of the mothers, a friend of Claire's, but she turned her face as soon as she saw him. Another father shook his head as if disapproving of something Ethan didn't even know he'd done. Inside, he saw his sons asleep in the arms of the school counselor, exhausted, their faces red from crying. "They need a break," she said, "and with all due respect, so do you. This has gone beyond the limits of grief." Ethan nodded, his eyes lowered, trying to swallow his pride. On the way out, carrying both of them in his arms, he felt harsh stares piercing his skin. For the first time, he realized the world was judging him too. The successful man, the cold entrepreneur, the father who can't handle his own 2 sons. In the car, the silence was thick. Until, from the back seat, Liam broke the void. "Daddy, did Mommy die because she was asleep?" Ethan froze. He tried to keep his hand steady on the wheel. Noah added, "If we go to sleep, will the grey woman take us too?" He had to pull the car over, take a deep breath. His chest felt like a ton of weight was about to crash down on his shoulders. "No, my loves. Sleeping is safe. Mommy had a problem with her heart. She didn't die because she was asleep." But he knew that explanation wasn't enough. Not for 2 children who found their own mother's body in bed, still warm, still smelling of her. Nothing he could say could undo that image. That night, Ethan made a desperate decision. He set up a campsite in the living room. He put mattresses on the floor, one next to the other. He stayed with the boys until the last second of consciousness. He left every light in the house on. He hired a security guard to stand at the front door all night. He installed motion sensors. He checked the external cameras. Everything was under control, at least technically. But at 2:47 a.m., the scream tore through the silence. "She's coming! Daddy, she's on the stairs!" Ethan ran, his heart pounding. Liam and Noah were pointing in panic at the empty staircase. The light at the top was flickering. The door to the 2nd floor was ajar. There was no one there. Nothing, not a sign, but the terror in his children's eyes was real. Ethan hugged them tightly. They cried together, the 3 of them on the cold living room floor. And there, amidst the tears, he realized something painful. Maybe there was nothing wrong with the house. Maybe the thing haunting his children wasn't on the outside, but on the inside. The next day, driven by desperation and guilt, he hired a team specializing in paranormal investigation, even without believing in it, even thinking it was absurd. He let them install sensors, microphones, thermal cameras. After 2 days of recording, the report was simple and cruel. No abnormal activity detected. The fear is real, but it is not external. Ethan looked at the report and felt his stomach drop. The grey woman didn't exist, but for his sons, she was more real than any hired security guard. And in that moment he knew this was no longer a matter of treatment. It was a matter of reconnection. Someone needed to rescue those boys from the darkness. Someone they would listen to, someone they would trust, someone who had more than technique, someone with a soul. Ethan spent the following days on autopilot. He cancelled appointments. He left his phone on silent. He forgot about emails, deadlines, meetings. All he could do was watch his sons and fail to understand them. Liam and Noah began refusing to sleep in their own rooms. They cried if they were separated. They slept piled on the living room sofa, covered in pillows, their eyes still open. At the slightest noise, they would jump up, startled, as if expecting an attack. They started creating rules of protection. They couldn't step off the rug after 9 p.m. They could only wear the blue pajamas, never the grey ones. Any deviation from these norms was followed by panic. Ethan watched it all with a crushed heart. He obeyed every ritual as if it were sacred law. He turned on all the lights. He left the TV on with no sound. He slept with them, squeezed onto the sofa. Anything in exchange for a few minutes of peace. But peace never came. One night, after another scare, some noise from the hallway followed by the boys' screams, Ethan locked himself in the bathroom. He turned the shower on hot and sat on the floor. For the first time since Claire's funeral, he cried without restraint. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was exhaustion. It was guilt. He felt like a fraud, a successful man on the outside, but broken on the inside. Someone who had lost not only his wife, but his own way, and his sons were sinking with him. The next morning, his face still swollen, he decided to look for another nanny. He knew it sounded naive after so many failed attempts, but something inside him whispered, "What if there's still a chance?" He asked his secretary for help and contacted a different agency, one that specialized in unconventional profiles. "Find someone who understands people more than resumes," he requested. "Someone with tact, with instinct." He received 3 recommendations. The first was a retired nurse with a postgraduate degree in childhood sleep disorders. The second, a play therapist with a master's in neuroscience and experience with early bereavement. The third was a woman named Maya Reed, with no college degree, no titles, but with 15 years of practical experience as a caregiver in shelters and underserved communities. Ethan scheduled the 3 interviews for the following weekend. On Friday, something curious happened. The boys were lying on the sofa, too tired to even play. Noah looked at the ceiling and murmured, "We should have been animals, like birds. Birds don't have to sleep in beds, and they sleep just fine." Ethan responded only by stroking his son's hair, but that phrase stuck with him. Birds, instinct, protection. On Saturday morning, he met with the first 2 candidates. Both spoke with confidence, brought manuals, theories, diagnoses. One of them looked directly at the boys and said, "You're afraid because you haven't understood yet that your mommy died." Liam left the room crying. Ethan dismissed them both politely, but without hope. And then, in the afternoon, Maya arrived. She was late. She carried an old suitcase and a cloth bag with children's drawings on it. She wore a simple blouse and light fabric pants. Her hair was up in a messy bun, and she had a smile so genuine it seemed from another era. "Sorry for the delay, Mr. Caldwell. The bus broke down, and I got lost in the neighborhood." He was about to respond formally, but was interrupted by his own surprise. Liam and Noah had approached without anyone calling them. They were looking at Maya with curiosity. She knelt down to their level, pulled a small cloth dragon from her bag, and asked, "Do you know Dandun? He's a dragon that protects the sleep of special children. He only appears to those who really need him." The boy's eyes widened. Ethan, who was watching everything in silence, felt something different in the air. Maya didn't ask about grief, trauma, or diagnoses. She just connected. For half an hour, she stayed with the twins in the living room. She invented a story on the spot, using pillows as mountains and the sofa as a castle. The boys smiled. For the first time in months, they smiled. When Maya was leaving, Liam ran to the door. "Miss, are you coming back tomorrow?" She looked at Ethan and answered in a soft voice, "If your daddy lets me, I'll be back. And I'll bring Dandon's shield." Ethan closed the door with tears in his eyes. He couldn't explain what he had felt. He only knew that, for the first time, someone had entered that house without being afraid of the darkness. And maybe, just maybe, that was the light they were missing. Have you ever felt completely lost, trying to help someone you love, and yet it never seemed to be enough? If so, comment, "I understand, just so I know you're here, that this story is touching something inside you too." Sometimes, all we need is to know we're not fighting alone. Maya returned on Monday morning just as she'd promised. She arrived with the same worn suitcase and a warm smile, but this time she also brought a large cardboard box, hand-painted with stars, moons, and small, colourful dragons. Inside was a collection of unlikely objects: feathers, wind chimes, pieces of fabric, vials that smelled of lavender, and a folder stuffed with children's drawings yellowed by time. "This is my courage kit," she said, opening the box in front of Liam and Noah, who stared with sparkling eyes. Everything in here was chosen by children who were also once very afraid to sleep. Ethan, leaning against the wall, watched the scene in silence. He was skeptical, yes, but something about Maya was slowly dissolving his internal resistance. Bianca didn't ask the boys to talk about their mother. She didn't ask about nightmares. Instead, she sat on the floor with them and said, "I need your help on a secret mission. We're going to build Dandun's shield." "Is it real?" Noah asked cautiously. "It's as real as the fear you feel, except the shield is stronger." They spent the morning drawing symbols of protection, cutting fabrics, placing the chimes in the right spots around the house. Each corner received a special name: the window of light, the corner of silence, the guardian's rug. Maya let the boys create the rules. She simply guided them with patience and complete attention. "It's okay to be scared," she would say, "but we get to choose what we do with that fear." When Ethan came home from work that evening, he found his sons in their pajamas, sitting in the living room, waiting for the story of the shield. Maya read with inflection, dramatic pauses, and funny voices. At the end, the boys applauded. "Are you ready to activate the shield?" she asked. Liam and Noah nodded. Bianca guided them through a small breathing ritual, placed the objects in their room, and said, "Now you have something that protects you inside and out." Ethan watched them, his chest tight, trying to understand how a woman he barely knew was achieving what no expert had managed, making his boys believe they were safe. That night, they slept for 4 straight hours. It was the first time in almost 9 months that Ethan didn't have to get up in the middle of the night. The next morning, Maya prepared a playful breakfast: Night Guardian pancakes. Each pancake had a design drawn with honey, a shield, a dragon, a star. "Eating this gives your heart courage," she explained lightly. The boys ate everything. Ethan couldn't remember the last time they had cleared their plates. On the second night, Maya invited them to create a map of good dreams. With craft paper and crayons, they drew everything they loved: their mom baking a cake, their dad playing hide-and-seek, the backyard, the neighbor's dog. They taped the map to their bedroom wall. "This is to remind you where to come back to when the dreams are bad," she explained, and somehow it worked. The boys still woke up once or twice, but not in a panic. They would call for Maya softly, and she would go calmly and guide them back to sleep with a story or a guided breath. On the 4th night, Liam said something that made Maya catch her breath. The Grey Lady still came, but the shield wouldn't let her in. That week, Ethan started coming home earlier. He would find Maya playing with his sons, cooking, reading stories. The house, once silent and tense, now smelled of warm food and was filled with the sound of small laughter. One evening, when the routine already felt magical, Maya sat on the sofa with the twins and asked, "If you could talk to your mommy for 1 minute, what would you say?" Liam thought for a few seconds. "That we still love her, and that it's okay because now someone else is helping take care of us," Noah added. "But that we haven't forgotten, okay?" Maya just nodded, holding back her emotion. That night, Ethan passed by his son's room and heard their light breathing. They were sleeping peacefully, hand in hand. He leaned against the door and stood there for a few minutes in silence. There were no real dragons, no shields. But there was something new in that house. Hope, and for the first time, in a very long time, peace. The following days seemed to be made of a new material: calm. Maya didn't change the house with grand gestures. She changed the energy, the small details. She installed thicker curtains in the bedrooms, which made the space feel cozier. She replaced the white light bulbs with warm, almost orange ones, reminiscent of afternoons at their grandmother's house. She left a lavender diffuser on during the night. Nothing clinical. Everything was done with intuition, with a touch of affection. More importantly, she created routines that brought meaning and emotional security. Every night before bed, Liam and Noah would perform the activation of the invisible shield together. They would touch the crystals they had glued to the headboard, recite the magic words they had created, and repeat in a low voice, "We are protected. We are loved. We are together." And when Maya said, "Good night," they no longer cried. Ethan, who at first just watched from a distance, slowly began to draw closer. He'd sit on the rug during story time. He'd ask about the meaning of the objects. Sometimes he was invited to be part of the ritual, and he accepted, even if he felt a little ridiculous. "You have to rub the crystal on your forehead, Daddy. It helps take the fear away." Noah would explain seriously. He would obey. Maya never laughed, never corrected, never said it was all in their heads. To her, it was all emotional truth, and it deserved respect. During the day, the boys started running around the backyard again. They created secret codes with Maya, funny names for simple things. The blender became the potion machine, the blue blanket, the invisibility cloak. Even the old living room sofa got a new title, the Throne of the Brave. Ethan gradually started to miss these moments. He realized he was spending more time in the kitchen, listening to their conversations. Sometimes he would sit on the floor with the three of them, a mug of coffee in his hand and a small smile on his face. He caught himself laughing at silly things, slowing down, coming back. One afternoon, as he watched his sons drawing in the backyard, Maya commented, "They're sleeping better, aren't they?" Ethan nodded. 7 hours last night. I can't even remember the last time that happened. They still wake up sometimes, but the fear is changing shape, she explained. Now they call for me, not their mom. That isn't forgetting. It's healing. Ethan looked at her intently. Maya had a simple way of speaking profound truths. There was no drama in anything she did, just presence, truth, and a rare ability to embrace what most people wanted to fix by force. At school, the teachers began to notice the difference. Liam started participating in circle time discussions again. Noah laughed out loud during snack time. The counselor called Ethan. "I wanted to congratulate you. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. The boys are flourishing." It was then that Ethan realized something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about sleep, it was about belonging. The house was alive again. One Sunday morning, Maya called the boys to prepare a guardian's breakfast. They made shield-shaped pancakes and drank pink smoothies with courage potion. Ethan helped serve. He stood there, watching the scene, his two sons laughing, their mouths smudged with honey, and Maya humming softly as she flipped the pancakes. "I don't remember the last time I saw this here," he commented almost in a whisper. "This lightness." Maya didn't reply. She just looked at him and smiled. And in that instant, Ethan felt something that had been growing slowly, but was now impossible to ignore. He wasn't just admiring Maya, he was becoming attached to her, not just for how she cared for the boys, but for how she filled the empty spaces in the house and in his heart. And it was at this point in the silent journey that Ethan began to fear something new. What if this was temporary? What if, once again, he had to watch someone walk away? But there was something he didn't know yet, something Maya was also feeling, even without saying a word. Sometimes you enter someone's life thinking you're there to fix one part, and you end up becoming part of the whole. That night, after the boys were asleep, no crisis, no exaggerated rituals, just a story and a kiss. Ethan stayed in the living room. He watched the warm glow of the lamp, the comfortable silence of the house, the gentle sound of the wind against the chimes Maya had hung near the porch. She appeared a few minutes later, a cup of tea in her hands, her apron gone, her hair down, and a serene look of someone who carried the day with dignity. "They fell asleep fast tonight," she commented, sitting on the sofa next to him. "You noticed that?" Ethan replied, unable to hide his astonishment. "They slept Like kids. She smiled, looking down at her cup, because they're starting to be kids again. Little by little. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a dense silence, full of everything that had not yet been said between them. Ethan took a deep breath. "Maya, can I ask you a personal question?" She nodded unhurriedly. "Did you ever want to have children?" She smiled with her eyes. "I always wanted to. But life didn't go down that path. I started working with children when I was very young, and I guess, in a way, I adopted little pieces of each one. I never had children of my own, but I have many children of the heart." Ethan was silent for a few seconds, and then, without beating around the bush, he said, "You know my sons see you as a mother, right?" She looked at the floor, breathed slowly. "I know, and I feel the same way about them." That confession didn't come with embarrassment. It came with the honesty of someone who was already past the point of emotional return. Ethan realized he didn't need to hide anything anymore. The desire to protect Maya, to have her close, to see her smile. It was no longer about gratitude. It was love. But he still hesitated. "I'm afraid of messing this up," he admitted. "Everything you've built with them. If I say something at the wrong time, if we confuse everything—" "Ethan," Maya interrupted, looking directly at him. "I'm scared too. But I think there's something happening here that's stronger than fear." Ethan felt his heart tighten. For the first time since Claire's death, he allowed himself to wish for a different future, not because he was forgetting, but because he was ready to move on. The next morning, he acted as he never had before. While Maya was making breakfast with the boys, he went to their room and examined the environment. The air conditioner's light was blinking. A faint, almost imperceptible hum came from the pipes. He had never paid attention to that detail before. He noted everything. He spent the rest of the day adjusting timers, changing filters, installing a white noise humidifier, a suggestion he had read in an old article and that somehow Maya was already using intuitively. When she arrived in the late afternoon, she found the house different, more organized, lighter. "Did you change the air cycles? They had an intermittent noise around 2:30 a.m., he explained. "It coincides with the times of their crises. I thought it was worth a shot." Maya smiled, surprised. "You're observing then. I'm learning from you." She said nothing. She just looked at him in a way Ethan had never seen before. A look that mixed gratitude, tenderness, and maybe something more. That night the boys slept for 7 straight hours. The next night, 8. On the third night, they woke up smiling. Not because they had a good dream, but because, for the first time, they didn't remember what they had dreamed. They just slept. On Saturday, Maya suggested a trip to the park. Ethan hesitated. It had been months since the boys had gone to public places without panicking, but she insisted. They need to remember that the world is still a good place. And so they went. Liam brought a cloth dragon. Noah brought a drawing of the invisible shield. They ran across the grass, played with other children, drank juice boxes, and ate popcorn. Ethan watched from a distance, sitting on a bench, his eyes filled with tears. "They're coming back to life," he said in a low voice, more to himself than to Maya. She sat next to him. She gently touched his hand on his knee. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was the gesture of someone who understands the weight the other is carrying and offers strength in silence. On the way home, Noah said, "Daddy, the grey lady didn't come today. Why do you think that is?" "I think she can't get in when we're really happy." Ethan laughed. Maya did too, and no one corrected him. Because right there, in that car, happiness was a real shield. That night, Ethan cooked dinner. Maya sat with the boys drawing, and as he stirred the pasta in the pot, he felt something ignite in his chest, a desire to build, to continue, not with just anyone, with her. Later, when the boys were asleep, he called her out to the porch. He was nervous, but he knew he had to say it. "Maya, I'm falling in love with you." She was silent. "I don't want to rush anything. I just wanted you to know. You didn't just save my sons. You saved me too." Maya looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I'm here And I'm feeling all of this too. They didn't kiss, not yet. But there, in that long, lingering gaze, was a silent promise. Love can come back, in a different way, but it can. And most importantly, it can be even more beautiful when it comes after the pain. The news spread quickly, even without an announcement. The Caldwell family was changing, and the people around them began to notice. At school, the teachers commented with a mix of relief and surprise. Liam was now participating in reading circles, raising his hand to answer questions. Noah smiled frequently, made shy jokes with his classmates, and no longer clung to his brother during recess. The counselor, who for months had avoided making optimistic predictions, called Ethan for a chat. I know I've said this before, but honestly, I have never seen a turnaround like this. Ethan smiled modestly. They just needed someone who spoke their language, someone who listened with their heart. And this Nanny, she commented, curious. She's more than she seems, isn't she? Ethan nodded, no further explanation needed. In the neighborhood, the changes also became visible. The neighbors who used to whisper when they saw him arriving with his head down, children in his arms, now saw him smiling at the gate, watching the two play in the backyard. The same backyard that was once silent was now a stage for laughter, improvised games, and small discoveries. One afternoon, Claire's old friend, the same one who used to turn her face away, stopped her car in front of the house. She called Ethan by name. "Can I tell you something?" He walked over to her, not knowing what to expect. "I didn't think you were going to make it. And I was wrong. The boys are different. You're different." Ethan just nodded, without vanity, without pride. It was simply a silent acknowledgement of a battle that was still being won, day by day. At work, his employees also noticed the change. The firmness returned to Ethan's gaze, but it was different now, lighter, more human. He began to delegate better, to listen more. He set strict hours to leave early and go home, and to everyone's surprise, he turned down a multi-million-dollar merger with a foreign network. "Why?" they asked. "Because I no longer want to build something big at the expense of what's essential," he replied. Deep down, everyone knew the essential now had a name, and it slept on two small mattresses, side by side, with a cloth dragon between them. One Saturday, during the traditional partners meeting for the Caldwell Group, one of the directors, David, the most senior, made an unfiltered comment. "You've been out of the headlines, Ethan. I thought you were going to sink after losing Claire, but you not only came back, you have become a different guy. Some people are even saying you've fallen in love again." Ethan smiled, and for the first time, he didn't deny it. "There are some things you don't plan. You just recognize them when they happen." "Is it serious, then?" "It is. Serious and right. And the boys? How are they with this new figure?" Ethan looked out the building's window. Down below, Maya was waiting with the twins, all ready to have lunch together after the meeting. He sighed. "She's not a new figure. She's part of the healing." The comment spread, of course. Soon, all their acquaintances, partners, employees, and relatives knew that Ethan Caldwell, the man who almost crumbled after his wife's death, was now walking beside a woman with no degree, no status, but with a rare power. The ability to see with her heart. There was, yes, some resistance. A distant aunt called, indignant, "But Ethan, a nanny. With your standard of living, I expected something else." And he calmly replied, "I expected something else too, but thank God, I received something better than I ever expected." Another friend, the kind who confuses prestige with value, joked at a dinner party. "Are you really going to make it official? Marry the nanny? What about the assets?" Ethan just smiled. "The greatest assets I have are my children. And she's the reason they're alive on the inside." These responses began to generate a new kind of respect. The people who used to laugh in silence now spoke with caution. Those who once judged began to admire. And more than that, those who truly cared began to be moved. Maya felt the change too. On the street, she was no longer just the caregiver. She was the woman who brought color back to a house that had become an embodiment of grief. Mothers from the school started to approach her. One of them, shyly, confided, "You're the kind of person I wish I had around when my daughter had depression." Maya thanked her, deeply moved. Deep down, she didn't feel any different. She still woke up early, prepared lunchboxes with care, listened to the boys' fears, and read stories before bed. But now, there was a silent recognition around her. Not for titles, but for presence. On Sunday, during a family trip to the zoo, Noah pointed to a sign and said, "Mommy would have loved this place, right?" Ethan looked at Maya. She nodded with a smile. She would have. And she's here with us, in a different way. Liam held her hand without saying a word, just a gentle squeeze, as if to confirm, now we have two moms. In that moment, in the middle of the zoo, surrounded by other families, Ethan knew the world was watching, but more importantly, the boys were feeling, and nothing else mattered. Ethan learned that grief doesn't have a finish line. You don't cure an absence. You learn to walk with it. For a long time, he thought he needed to conquer the pain to start living again, as if sadness were a wall to be knocked down, when in reality, it was a dark room he needed to learn how to illuminate. And that light, he discovered, didn't come from strength. It came from presence. Maya didn't fill Claire's place. She built a new space alongside it with affection and listening, with time, with simplicity. And that's what Ethan understood in the end, that love isn't a competition, it's addition. Liam and Noah started sleeping again, not because they forgot the trauma, but because someone taught them that it's possible to be afraid and still move forward, that missing someone doesn't mean living trapped in the past, and that remembering their mother with fondness is different from being swallowed by her absence. The most beautiful lesson didn't come from an expert, nor from an expensive book. It came from an ordinary woman with a giant soul who never tried to fix anyone. She just walked alongside them with patience and truth until the holes became bridges. Ethan learned that rebuilding is not erasing, it's including the memory, the pain, the absence, and continuing to love anyway. And in a world where so many people fake strength, he discovered that allowing yourself to be cared for is also an act of courage. His story, in the end, wasn't about finding someone for his children. It was about rediscovering his own role as a father, as a man, as a human, and about understanding that sometimes the person who saves an entire family is precisely the one the world would never expect. Time passed. Not much, just enough for the roots to begin to take hold. 6 months after that first meeting, Maya was no longer the nanny. She was part of the house, part of the days, part of the story. There was no formal marriage proposal, no party. What happened was more subtle. One morning, Liam woke up and asked if Maya was going to live with them forever. Ethan looked at her, smiling, and answered before he even heard her reply, "Yes, she is." Little by little, Maya took on the role she already occupied in the boys' hearts, not as a substitute, but as a living continuation of love. Ethan would say with pride that he had found not just someone to care for his children, but someone who cared for the silence between them. And that, he learned, was worth more than any resume. Liam started playing the guitar with his grandfather again. Noah began art therapy, something he had previously refused out of fear. Maya accompanied him to the sessions, always with the same gentleness, one step at a time, at his own pace. At school, teachers said the brothers had become emotional benchmarks for their peers, the ones who were most comforting when someone cried or felt out of place, perhaps because they knew firsthand what it was like to feel too alone. Ethan went back to his business, but now with a different priority. Every day at 6 p.m. sharp, his phone went into his pocket and his car was already running. He never missed a single dinner. And on Sundays, they invented a new tradition. warm heart day. It was when they would prepare something special together. No rush, no rules. A picnic in the backyard, a marathon of old movies, an afternoon painting a bedroom wall. The name was Noah's idea, because it feels like when we're all together our hearts get warm inside. And no one argued. Claire remained present in discreet portraits, in stories told at the dinner table, in details kept with affection. Maya never tried to take her place. She simply walked alongside the memory and treated it with respect. And that was exactly why, in that house, love was able to begin again. Not like before, but in the right way, with new colors, new fears, and new promises. Promises that now slept peacefully under the silent protection of an invisible shield, and of a love that knew how to arrive slowly, but stay forever. If this story touched your heart in any way, if you also believe that love can be born again, even after pain, leave a like. It shows that these stories deserve to keep being told. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel if you believe in the power of stories that heal. And now, choose one of the stories appearing on your screen and join me for the next video. There's a lot more emotion waiting for you.